Welcome to the 62nd episode of Dialogika, a podcast between two friends about the latest in politics, society, and feminism in Indonesia and the world. I'm Stephanie Tangkilisan.
I'm Sudian Lee, and this is our first episode in 2019. We're back.
Woo!
Thank you for your patience.
Or caring.
Okay. Thank you for waiting for us. We're excited to be back. We both took a break. Stephanie took a work break, whatever that means.
A work break means I went to Indonesia and reported on Indonesian stories, which will be coming out on Narasi TV next week, I think. I had the opportunity to work with Najwa Shihab's team and did a small investigative story about the tsunami that happened. And I also got food poisoning, which was why I could not record last week. So, double reasons, y'all.
So,
don't at me.
We'll keep you updated about Stephanie's piece when it comes out, but we're excited to be back. I took a real break, as most normal people do.
I'll just get burnt out. It's fine. Yes, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
We're going to be talking about the first big ticket item of the year in Indonesian politics, and that's obviously the first debate between the presidential candidates that happened on 17th of January, just last week. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to talk about, even though the debate itself was actually quite boring.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to give you all of our hot takes and then some, but we're really excited to talk about this very important debate that will determine the fate of our country.
Yep, which is really terrifying.
So here's to it.
Kedua pasangan calon presiden dan calon wakil presiden dipersilahkan menempati podium masing-masing.
So, Sway, what's your first hot take?
There was a lot of anticipation with this debate, I think, for a lot of certainly millennials and certainly my group of friends, which is, I think, interesting in itself. The last time a presidential debate cycle came around, we were still younger, right? We were just graduating out of college, so there's a certain sense of like, do we know about the topics yet? Are we going to participate in politics like normal adults? Mm-hmm. This time it felt like, we really had to watch it, even if we didn't. Like, I have a lot of friends who don't care about politics, who don't really know what's going on, but they all talked about it and they all decided to watch it in their own way. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, though, like with so much anticipation from the youth, it was a pretty boring and very
lackluster debate.
Yeah, it was so sort of like, this is, most of the things they've talked about are things we've heard about them from their platforms. Uh-huh. There was nothing exciting, nothing new, and it felt very much like a campaign rally rather than any sort of substantial debate about these really important topics about, corruption,
terrorism, and human rights, right? I think one of my major hot takes is like the format. Oh my god, what was going on with the undian, the lottery to get ABCDE questions? Like,
I mean, it felt like a game show, right?
It felt like it was trying to be a game show, but it just killed time and I think momentum.
Oh, totally. The candidates themselves aren't necessarily the most compelling people.
Yeah, right. So what happened was the moderator, Irakusno, has a fishbowl with like the lottery number for which question. And then the presidential candidates had to take them out of the bowl, and then they would like, oh, it's A, and then they would open the envelope for A. Mm-hmm. But like, it's just trying hard to like give an air of fairness.
Yeah.
But in the end, doesn't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that was exhausting for me to watch and was unnecessary. I would rather just like have the candidates get the question and then like be allowed to actively engage with one another. Yeah, that was my major takeaway.
At least for me personally, I I have to be perfectly frank. I didn't watch I didn't watch the presidential debates in 2014 because I wasn't like woke or anything like that. I didn't really care that much about it. So I wasn't sure like if the format is a tried and true format that they all stuck with because it's what's been used, or is this just something they were doing in order to make it more fun, more dramatic?
No, this is new.
This is new. the picking the questions from a fishbowl is new.
Yeah, I think so.
It's really funny actually. I was monitoring some Twitter comments after the debate, and everybody was just like, this felt like a game show. Like this felt like the draw of like the Champions League in soccer. You know, it's like what's going on?
Yeah, and I feel like it kind of infantilized the Indonesian audience just because like we don't need this kind of format in order to be engaged. Like we need content to be engaged. It felt like
yes.
And it felt like, oh, if you do this format, it means that we believe you that the questions weren't leaked. It was just like it just was all around infantilizing to me. That was my hot take on it.
Yeah.
My second hot take would be it just felt like it was very apparent the lack of chemistry between Jokowi and Ma'ruf Amin versus that of Prabowo and Sandi. Like,
oh yeah,
it didn't feel like Jokowi and Ma'ruf Amin were people who spent a lot of time together discussing issues and enjoyed each other's company and were complementary pairs. That really felt to me that they were just stuck together. And then when Ma'ruf did speak, the little that he did, Joko would just look down and then be like questioning my life decisions. Look, slash like
that meme of just like staring into the distance.
Yeah, like wishing like Mahmoud MD was his choice instead. But yeah, it was just like very apparent that it didn't seem like they are a pair who would work well together and work as a team together. Whereas I feel like with Prabowo and Sandi, it felt like they actually liked each other and were friends and complimented each other, because when Prabowo was really tense,
that weird dancing boxing moment,
like Sandi ended up like massaging Prabowo's shoulders and be like, relax. That it seemed to me that Sandi might actually be a good counterbalance for Prabowo's more emotionalness. Sandi seemed like to keep his cool really well, and didn't get provoked. I felt like Sandi was the best performer of this debate, to be honest.
That's actually what I felt as well. I thought out of the bunch, the best speaker was in a way Sandi. Mm-hmm. Maybe because we're so used to Jokowi, and we know that he can sort of like get his thoughts across well. He has a pretty good poker face, right? He's not somebody that gets phased that easily, but Prabowo is somebody that gets phased that easily. That's nothing new. We all know that he has tendencies to be emotional.
Yeah.
And Sandi was a great counterbalance.
And it was the difference between Ma'ruf Amin and Sandi just looks so apparent on that stage, right? Ma'ruf Amin was, the older gentleman with few words and more from older generations. I don't know how else to say old in a way that is not ageist. And Sandi is like, new, clean-shaven, a new face of Muslim, very groomed and polished, and my friends were definitely fans of Sandi and his being a hot daddy.
Right. That's also a nice
a visual contrast. I think for like the millennial Indonesians, they'll be like, he is what I would want to see as a vice president versus Ma'ruf Amin. And this is like a main contention.
For the tante and ibu also.
For the tante and younger women. It's Sandi is a cross-generational crush, let's just say.
He appeals to everyone who's looking for some eye candy.
Yeah. But he's also smart and substantive.
That's the thing, right?
Very well educated and accomplished business person.
And in a way, he's been the spokesperson for Prabowo and for these issues for a long time. He's seasoned as anybody else in this
game.
And when you pit Ma'ruf Amin against somebody like him, it was it was like night and day, and the silences just felt so awkward.
Right.
I can't remember in 2014 when Prabowo ran, who was his running mate? Do you remember?
Was it Haritano or Hatta Rajasa?
I think it was Hatta Rajasa, right? The white-haired guy.
Yeah, I think so. Hatta. Yeah, sorry.
Prabowo's running mate was Hatta Rajasa, and I think we can all fairly say that he is not nearly as charming or as interesting a running mate as Sandi.
I mean, at that time, it also came out that Hatta Rajasa's son had a driving accident, remember? That he escaped justice from. That was not helpful.
But I guess I bring this up because Sandi feels like a fresh face.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, we cannot underestimate the power of a fresh face in campaign politics, especially presidential politics, in which people are always sort of like tired and want, quick changes, want something new, want something fresh. So,
right. I mean, like, Sandi is definitely a good choice for Prabowo too, right? Just because it's such a different generation. Because Jokowi is young and Prabowo is not young as Jokowi. And Sandi has the economic business background, which I thought was really interesting in the presidential debates, how Sandiaga always brought up concrete examples / stories from the common folk that he brings up, and it just felt like he did his homework and talked to the common folk and used their stories in his speech, which to some city people, some pundits felt like he was pandering / just like using those stories. But I thought it was actually really effective as a way to show, okay, I might be a Jakarta elite, but I've been to the ground, I've talked to people, I've, sat down and heard people's stories. I thought it was like a relatively smart move on his part, and it could work. Maybe not for the more skeptical city elites, but I don't know about those in different, more rural areas.
I mean, especially since because
Indonesia is a popular vote country, unlike America, so that's what counts.
And also, don't underestimate the votes of the rural people, right? Like the people in the countryside. It's also interesting because I think it was a savvy move, you're right, because I feel like this time around one of the complaints and grievances lobbied against Jokowi is that his policies are not pro-people enough.
Yeah.
Especially since I feel like the Prabowo Sandi ticket, their entire foundation of the argument is that we are super pro-people. We are super pro-rakyat, as opposed to Jokowi's government. So I think Sandi definitely kept on message. Like, I feel like he's the campaign manager's dream speaker candidate. Like, this guy will stay on message, will hit the marks, and will not mess things up. And that cannot always be said about Prabowo.
Oh, no. Jokowi looked like he's aged dramatically.
Well, there's something to be said, right?
All the stress.
All the...
Kaja. Work.
All the stress, but it's also like Prabowo's running mate is like this young, hot guy, and then Jokowi's running mate is this older gentleman, so I feel like the energy levels are just different.
Yeah, I mean, someone on Twitter called him Yoda.
Oh, God.
I love Indonesian Twitter. Shout out to Indo Twitter.
Indonesian Twitter is the best.
Why do you think he spoke so little? Is it just...
I think he's just very green. He's just very inexperienced in campaigning.
So rather than make a mistake, he would just stay silent.
Especially since Jokowi is so good at staying on message that I think, he doesn't want to do anything that would compromise what Jokowi is saying.
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, they positioned him really well, right? Like, all of the other things he didn't really contribute. But then when it got into terrorism, when we're talking about religion, then he's sort of like, this is clearly what he's been prepared for.
This is my role.
Exactly.
It is time for I to speak. And what did you think of his answer?
It felt very on brand. It felt very on message.
Recap. What was the message?
All right, so for those of you who didn't stay...
who missed it.
Watching the debate until the end when they were talking about terrorism. Ma'ruf Amin, who is the current chair of MUI, he said that, and I quote, "Terrorism is a crime that we need to eradicate to its roots. That's why the MUI issued a fatwa that states that terrorism is not jihad but haram." So the first thing he says immediately is to implicate and to involve Indonesia's largest and most powerful Islamic organization to denounce terrorism. And saying that, his role in the organization and his position gives him the authority to say that, like, oh, we as representatives of Islam in Indonesia do not support terrorism, and we as religious leaders will not tolerate for this.
Yeah.
And as part of that, he also mentioned about the need to de-radicalize and suppress radicalism using religious methods, right? Like, teaching the right doctrines of Islam.
Right.
Using religious organizations and gatherings in order to make sure the misguided strands of Islam that is being used for terrorism does not take root. Which I thought was very much why Ma'ruf Amin was brought into the fold, because he could bring in that Muslim religious authority kind of influence.
He could, but the point is, has it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there seems to be a ploy that hasn't really worked. Point is that, like, a lot of Muslims are going to listen to what their personal imam or ulama would say, and a lot of them are still saying Prabowo Sandi.
Yeah.
And that's that. It doesn't seem to have mattered that Ma'ruf Amin is now on the ticket.
That's interesting.
It seems. Because, like, I mean, Prabowo and Sandi have been the ones on the forefront of 212 for a while now, and
Yeah.
you can't just erase that, right? Like, it seems to be like, oh, these were the people who were there before, and Jokowi wasn't. So that seems to speak louder than the fact that Ma'ruf Amin was one of the people who was a key witness against Ahok in his trials and is on that position.
Yeah.
Sandi is also from, like, a very Santri family, like a long line of respected Muslim figures in the community. They've been in that scene for 2 years or so more now, right?
They've built those
And
relationships.
Ma'ruf Amin was just appointed last few months, so it's different, right? It's like choosing Sarah Palin and then hoping that counts for the women's vote.
Yeah.
That's essentially what I'm saying.
Which did not work.
Yeah.
But create a lot of memes though. So this might be what happened here.
It might be an equivalent.
Cukup.
Cukup.
I think, it's interesting because I could tell that, like, when Ma'ruf Amin spoke, he spoke with, he spoke with innocence in a way, in terms of, like, a campaigner.
Mm.
And he was very neutral in his voice, right? He was very sort of like, these are not extreme ideas. These are very simple, very straightforward ideas.
Yeah.
While on the other side, when Prabowo spoke about what his platform would do against terrorism, he was tapping into emotional arguments, right?
Right.
Saying that, like, people who stray into the world of terrorism do so because they're going through despair and economic inequality, and they feel hurt by what's going on in terms of the government policies. Like, he taps into those very core emotional sentiments. That is honestly what compels a lot of people to decide on things.
Yeah.
It felt strange because you're like, if the goal is to get somebody respected in the Muslim community in order to speak to your particular platform, it's interesting that Prabowo and Sandi has succeeded more, in my opinion, than somebody like Ma'ruf Amin.
The way Ma'ruf Amin chose to say his platform, I think sounds good to a more international, more moderate platform.
And maybe some
but
elites.
It does kind of sound like it's othering those who chose to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas Sandi and Prabowo's message was like, oh, it's the economic conditions. Like, you can't really blame them being seduced by the force,
Yeah.
And we need to make life better so they don't feel ostracized. And
to be fair, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? Like, they're addressing...
I think it's both, for sure.
They're addressing important concerns on all sides of the terrorism question.
Yeah.
One of the things I also want to point out of the debate is that almost like all the technical comments are given to Sandi because he can deliver them well, and then the more emotional, like, you're not doing this right kind of comments is given to Prabowo, and sometimes it backfires.
Yeah.
What else did Prabowo talk about, Steph?
Women and how progressive he is as the party that has the most women candidates on their ballots.
If you gauge his other responses about women, you don't think he's that progressive.
What was the other comments?
So one of the comments he mentioned about the kind of people that should work in politics, he mentioned to Jokowi that, this is what he's saying, right? I'm paraphrasing what he said. The public does not want you to appoint women ministers just because they're women. They should be women who are smart and pro-people, not just women who produce policies that bring harm to the people. That's what he thinks. He thinks that a lot of the women ministers that are in Jokowi's cabinet right now are not pro-people enough. So he says, like, I will not just choose women just because they're women, they have to be good. And then he passed the time limit of his section, and so somebody had to cut him off. It was just so badly worded. Like, you could tell what he's going for, but
which,
it was,
like, you would agree with. Like,
yeah,
you shouldn't disappoint women because of women, but the way it was said seemed questionable.
This is really fascinating, right? Like, we're talking about these things after the debate, but I remember, as you said earlier, during the debate itself, I certainly wasn't really thinking about, these statements about these programs are not right, they're misleading, whatever. But I was sort of like, there's a lot of weird drama right now.
Yeah.
Like awkward tensions, body language. So I was doing my thing of like watching the debate and also reading things on Twitter just to see what other, what people in Indonesia, the netizens in Indonesia were thinking. And they were saying the same thing, they were much more interested in the drama rather than the programs, the policies, sort of like the facts being said itself. And I think that says a lot about the debate, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really reveal anything new about how these candidates view these topics. So there's going to be 4 more debates. I hope they improve in quality. And, I don't necessarily want dramas for drama's sake, I want actual quality debates.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think we'll get there?
I think we will. I think you have to allow I think there's this tension in Indonesian politics between like civility and trying to score points. Like whenever they try to do jabs with each other,
they're polite about it.
Sometimes it gets uncomfortable. Yeah, they're polite about it. It's like they're not like outright conflicting, which is like an Indonesian polite thing.
Yeah, the Javanese.
But it's definitely possible. Like, we just need to have a format that allows the back and forth to go quickly. Like, the moderator needs to like guide the discussion instead of dictating where the discussion goes.
Yeah.
And or force them to like, you're not really answering the question or statement, because that's generally what happened. I felt like, like they were saying their platitude, their campaign platforms, and they're not actively engaging with one another most of the time. And I think the role of the moderator should like be like, like how does this, what you said, interact with what they said, and
the moderators didn't push them enough.
Yeah.
Which begs the question then, when we go into the next round of debates, especially the rounds of debates when it's just Joko and Prabowo, and then when it's just Ma'ruf Amin and Sandiaga Uno.
I want to see the just Ma'ruf Amin and Sandi Uno.
I know, that will be so fascinating, right? Like Joko and Prabowo, fine, whatever, we know what's up.
Fine, whatever. We've seen this happen. Like,
but Ma'ruf and Sandi, oh boy, that's gonna be. We could easily poke fun at Ma'ruf Amin, right? In terms of like how he performed, how inexperienced he was, but at the same time, I do hope that by the time it gets to Ma'ruf and Sandi, that Ma'ruf Amin will be much more eloquent, will be able to back up his arguments better, speak a little bit longer, and really dig into sort of like the intricacies of some of these issues, because I don't, he'll always have to tag off that person that the Jokowi faction got to appease the Muslim base. If he really ever wants to rise above that, then he needs to bring up his A game, right?
For sure.
I do think for the better of political debate, for the better of our democracy, he should step it up. Whether or not he will is a different question, but I do hope that he will, because it'll be fascinating, honestly, if he does step it up and then go head to head against Sandi and see how that goes. So, it'll be remiss if we don't mention what's happening today as this episode is going out. The former vice governor of Jakarta, Basuki Tjahaja Purnama, better known as Ahok, is finally going to be released from prison after almost 2 years of his sentence for blasphemy charges.
Mm-hmm. He's out on good behavior.
Mm-hmm. What's sort of like the feeling on the ground in Indonesia, do you think, about his release?
I think it's being overshadowed by all the presidential stuff right now. I think it's a good time for him to be released
True.
Before things happen, and I feel like he's really keeping his head pretty down.
Oh, yeah.
For the most part, the only news we heard is that he wants to be called BTP now, Basuki Tjahaja Purnama, instead of Ahok. I think he's like distancing himself away from his Chinese-Indonesian identity and keep his head really low for the next year or so.
Yeah.
That's my prediction.
He wrote a long letter that was published by his team on Instagram saying, like, he's gone through a transformative period during his time in prison and he's going to come out a changed man. And I think the name change is a very literal way of showing that.
Yeah.
Especially since, it's very hard, obviously, to separate the Chinese-Indonesian aspect of Ahok. But I do think that name has become tainted.
Yeah.
Certainly some of it is his own doing, but it's also by other people. And it's just no longer useful, right? To like, why do you want to associate yourself with that name if it's only going to tie you down to all of this baggage?
You're right. I mean, it's kind of sad for a lot of Chinese-Indonesians that you think that it makes sense, but it feels like he is forced to do this. And it's like, I think it's reminiscent of, when in the 60s when Indonesians were forced to change our actual Chinese names to Indonesian sounding ones. It's that again, and it's like always the question of how assimilated can you get, and it's like never enough is basically the answer.
Yeah. So, Ahok's going to be released. I don't think there's going to be much fanfare about it. He's telling everybody who's supporting him to not show up at the prison, keep it low, keep it quiet, which I think is what he wants.
And for his sake, I think that's what people should do.
Yeah. He doesn't need any more attention after so many years of attention. I read somewhere that, he's accepted speaking gigs outside of the country.
Oh, really?
And he's going to show up giving seminars and stuff like that about certain topics. He could be going to places in the West as well as in Asia. So I think that's interesting that he wants to sort of like
go out
literally be outside of the country.
Fair.
And it's fascinating, right? Because I remember probably like a year ago, people were saying like, oh, when Ahok comes out, he's gonna be supporting this party, or he's gonna go straight in back into politics. Will he be appointed by Jokowi?
No way.
It's like, no way.
No way.
For the sake of everyone involved, he really should, in my opinion, take a step back.
Yeah.
He's still a talented figure, you cannot discredit what he's done.
I mean, we just need to, I think he'll just wait for the right time and see when that would be. Yeah, and I think it's also a matter of like, we need to see who actually also wins the election, and then what is the atmosphere of the country after that, because I feel like everything is pending until that time comes.
Until after April.
Yeah, because...
Who knows?
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find more information and resources of whatever we talked about on our website, dialogika.id.
Music credits to John Dealey, Lee Roosevelt, and of course, Broke for Free.
If you like what you hear and want to support us, please review our podcast on the Apple Podcast app or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. And please share our podcast with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about Dialogika.
If you want to get more involved, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is dialogikapodcast@gmail.com, or just shoot us a message on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and now Twitter. Please follow us on these various platforms. Our Twitter handle is @DialogikaPod. Also, follow me on Twitter. It's StephTank. That's STEPHTANGK.
Thank you again, and see you guys next time.
Bye!